They thought buying a new home would fix everything, but what they found inside rewrote their story. A hidden room sealed by time and silence, and what was inside changed their lives forever. If you found a secret that could heal or break your love, would you open the door? The gravel driveway crunched under the tires of the U-Haul as James Harper pulled up to the house for the first time as its owner. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, staring at the two-story structure through the dusty windshield. The house was exactly as the photos had shown, tired, sagging slightly on its foundation, with faded blue paint peeling in long strips like old skin. But it was theirs. Or at least, it would be once they figured out what to do with it. Beside him, Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt without a word and stepped out of the truck, her movements careful, deliberate, as if she were trying not to disturb something fragile between them. James watched her walk toward the porch, her arms crossed against the October chill, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than 42. She used to smile when they arrived somewhere new. Now she just looked tired. The key stuck in the front door lock, rusted from years of disuse. James jiggled it, his jaw tightening with frustration, and Olivia stood behind him, silent, waiting. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. Finally, the lock gave way with a reluctant click, and the door swung open, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled like dust and old wood and something faintly floral, like dried lavender left too long in a drawer. James stepped inside first, his footsteps echoing on the warped hardwood floors. The living room stretched out before them, dim and hollow, furniture-shaped shadows cast by the afternoon light filtering through yellowed curtains. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling in the corner, and the wallpaper, once probably cheerful, covered in tiny roses, was peeling in long curls. "It's cozy," Olivia said quietly, though her voice held no conviction. James almost laughed, but it caught in his throat. Instead, he turned to her and forced a smile. "It's got good bones. That's what the inspector said." "Bones," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Then she walked past him into the kitchen, her footsteps fading down the narrow hallway. They worked in silence for the first hour, unloading boxes from the truck and stacking them in the rooms they thought made the most sense. James carried the heavy ones, books, dishes, tools, while Olivia handled the smaller things, carefully placing them on counters and shelves like she was assembling a life she no longer recognized as hers. Every so often, their paths would cross in the hallway or the doorway, and they'd exchange a look brief, polite, careful before moving on. It hadn't always been like this. 2 years ago, they'd talked constantly, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at private jokes no one else understood. 2 years ago, they'd been planning a nursery. Now they moved around each other like strangers sharing a bus seat, both afraid to take up too much space. It was James who broke the silence first, standing in the middle of the living room, surveying the peeling wallpaper with his hands on his hips. "I think we should start upstairs," he said. "Get the bedroom livable first. Then we can work our way down." Olivia appeared in the doorway, holding a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile" in faded marker. "You want to sleep here tonight?" she asked. "Why not? We paid for it." She glanced around the room, at the water stains and the sagging ceiling and the dust motes drifting lazily through the shafts of light. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was small, fleeting, but real. "You're insane," she said softly. "Maybe," James replied. And for the first time in months, he felt something loosen in his chest. "But we've done crazier things." Her smile faded, but not unkindly. She set the box down on the counter and nodded. "Okay. Upstairs first?" The second floor was worse than the first. The hallway was narrow and dim, lined with dark wood paneling that made the space feel claustrophobic. 3 doors led off it, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, and at the far end, a small window overlooked the overgrown backyard. James started in the larger bedroom, prying at the old paneling with a crowbar, testing to see how much work it would take to pull it all down. Olivia worked in the smaller room, unpacking linens and arranging things on the shelves with the kind of quiet focus she'd perfected over the past 2 years. Head down, hands busy, mind somewhere else. The house creaked around them, settling into the evening, the floorboards groaning under their weight like old bones adjusting to movement. James worked methodically, wedging the crowbar into the seams of the paneling and pulling, each strip coming away with a satisfying crack. Dust filled the air, catching the fading sunlight from the window. He was halfway down the hall when the crowbar caught on something that didn't give. He frowned and pressed harder. The panel shifted slightly, but instead of pulling free, it revealed a seam thin, barely visible, running vertically from floor to ceiling. James stopped. He ran his hand along the seam, tracing it with his fingers. It wasn't a natural break in the wood. It was deliberate. A line too straight, too clean. He pressed his palm flat against the wall, hollow. His heart quickened slightly, curiosity overriding caution. He knocked once, twice, and the sound echoed back empty, resonant. Wrong. Olivia, he called, his voice steady but edged with something he couldn't name. Footsteps approached from the other room. She appeared in the doorway, holding a folded blanket, her brow furrowed. What? James stepped back from the wall, gesturing toward the seam. Look at this. Olivia moved closer, setting the blanket down on the floor. She ran her hand along the same line he had traced, her fingers moving slowly, methodically. Then she knocked, just as he had, hollow. They looked at each other. There's something behind it, James said quietly. Olivia's expression shifted curiosity, unease, something else he couldn't quite read. Why would someone wall off part of a hallway? She asked. James didn't answer, because he didn't know. But as he stood there, staring at the seam in the wall, he felt the house shift around them, not physically, but in some subtle, indefinable way, like it had been waiting. And now, finally, someone had noticed. They stood in the hallway for a long moment, both staring at the seam in the wall. The house had gone quiet around them, as if holding its breath. James ran his hand along the line again, tracing it from the floor to the ceiling, his fingers catching on the faint ridge where the paneling didn't quite meet. It's too perfect, he said quietly. Someone built this on purpose. Olivia crouched down, pressing her palm against the baseboard where the seam began. Why would anyone do that? She asked, more to herself than to him. James didn't answer. He was already moving, heading back to the bedroom where he'd left his toolbox. By the time he returned, Olivia had pulled out her phone and was scrolling through the photos the realtor had sent them, the listing images, the floor plan, the property disclosure. Look, she said, holding the phone up so he could see the screen. This hallway should be longer. According to the blueprint, there's at least another 3 feet of space here. James leaned in, comparing the image to the physical wall in front of them. She was right. The hallway ended too soon. So what's behind it? Olivia asked, her voice quieter now, edged with something James couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or unease. He set the toolbox down and pulled out a hammer and a flathead screwdriver. Only one way to find out. The paneling came away easier than James expected, the nails old and rusted, some of them barely holding. He worked carefully, prying each strip loose and setting it aside, revealing the drywall beneath. Olivia stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, watching. What if it's just, I don't know, a structural thing? She said. Like, maybe they had to seal it off because of mold or something. James paused, glancing back at her. Then we'll deal with it. Better to know now than later. Oh. She nodded, but didn't move closer. He turned back to the wall and wedged the screwdriver into a gap in the drywall, pulling it away in chunks. Dust filled the air, catching the fading evening light from the window at the end of the hall. And then, behind the drywall, he saw it. A door. It was narrow, barely 3 feet wide, painted the same faded white as the rest of the hallway. But it had been sealed not with drywall or plaster, but with a simple bolt, rusted but intact, locked from the outside. James stared at it, his pulse quickening. "Olivia," he said quietly. She stepped forward, her breath catching when she saw the door. "Oh my God!" James reached out, his fingers brushing the bolt. It was cold, rough with age. "Someone locked this from out here," he said. "Not from inside." Olivia's brow furrowed. "Why would you lock a door from the outside in your own house?" James didn't have an answer. He looked at her, and for the first time in months, he saw something other than distance in her eyes. Fear, maybe, but also something else. Curiosity. "Do you want to open it?" he asked. Olivia hesitated, chewing on her lower lip the way she always did when she was thinking. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yeah, I do." The bolt resisted at first, stuck with rust and years of disuse. James had to work it back and forth, his hands straining, until finally it slid free with a metallic groan. He glanced at Olivia one more time. She nodded. He pushed. The door swung inward, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, like the inside of a chest that hadn't been opened in decades. The space beyond was small, no larger than a closet, lit only by the dim hallway lights spilling in from behind them. James fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight and aiming it inside. The beam swept across the room, revealing walls lined with faded floral wallpaper, a low ceiling, and a wooden floor covered in a thin layer of dust. And in the center of the floor sat a wooden chest, its surface scratched and worn. Beside it, a stack of journals bound with fraying string. And on a small folding table pushed against the far wall, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, its spools empty, waiting. Olivia stepped forward, her breath shallow, and her gaze lifted to the wall above the chest. There, pinned with yellowed tape, was a black and white photograph. A young couple, maybe in their 30s, standing in front of a house. This house, James realized, smiling at the camera. The man held a baby in his arms, wrapped in a blanket, tiny fists curled against his chest. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped beside her, following her gaze to the photograph. The woman in the picture was young, her hair dark and pulled back in a simple bun, her smile soft and warm. And her face? James felt his stomach drop. She looked almost exactly like Olivia. Not identical, but close enough to be unsettling. The same strong jawline, the same dark eyes, the same way her mouth turned up at the corners when she smiled. Olivia took a step back, her hand still pressed to her lips, her eyes wide. "That's not possible," she breathed. James didn't respond, because he didn't know what to say. They stood there, frozen in the doorway of the hidden room, staring at the photograph of a woman who looked like Olivia, holding a baby, smiling at a camera decades before either of them had been born. And in the silence, the house settled around them with a low, groaning creak, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. They didn't speak as they carried everything from the hidden room into the living room. James went first, cradling the wooden chest against his chest like it might break. Olivia followed with the journals, their pages brittle and yellowed, tied together with string that had frayed over the years. The tape recorder came last, heavier than it looked, its metal casing cold in James's hands. They set everything on the floor in front of the fireplace, the only space in the house that felt remotely lived in. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The chest sat between them like a question neither was ready to answer. James was the one who finally reached for it. The latch was rusted, but it gave way with a soft click, and the lid creaked open, releasing a faint smell of lavender and cedar. Inside, folded carefully, were small clothes, a child's dress, pale yellow with tiny flowers embroidered along the hem, a pair of white shoes, scuffed at the toes, a stuffed rabbit, its fur matted and worn, one button eye missing. Olivia's breath caught. "Oh," she whispered, and the word came out broken. James set the rabbit down gently, his hands trembling slightly. Beneath the clothes were drawings, crayon scribbles on construction paper, the kind a toddler makes before they understand shapes. A sun, a house, stick figures holding hands. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in tissue paper, was a framed photograph. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile, sitting on a woman's lap. The same woman from the photograph upstairs. James turned the frame over. On the back, written in faded ink, Catherine, March 1984. Olivia reached for the journals with shaking hands. There were 7 of them, bound in cracked leather, their spines worn smooth from years of handling. She opened the first one carefully, as if it might disintegrate at her touch. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost elegant. The 3rd of January 1980. Snowed overnight. Thomas shoveled the walk before breakfast. Catherine helped, though mostly she just threw snowballs at the dog. She laughed so hard she fell over. I could listen to that sound forever. Olivia's throat tightened. She turned the page. The 14th of February 1980. Thomas brought me flowers. Catherine made a valentine for him out of construction paper. He cried when she gave it to him. He tries to hide it, but I see how much he loves her. I see it every day. James leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. The entries continued like that for Page's small, ordinary moments. Grocery lists, weather observations, notes about Catherine's growth, her words, her laughter. Then, abruptly, the tone changed. The 12th of August, 1984. She's gone. I can't write it. I can't say it. But she's gone. Olivia's hand trembled as she turned the page. The next entry was dated a month later. The 10th of September, 1984. Thomas says I need to let go. He says we can't keep living like this. But how do you let go of your child? How do you stop hearing her voice in every room? The entries grew shorter, more fractured. The 2nd of October, 1984. I set a place for her at dinner. Thomas didn't say anything. He just took the plate away after I went to bed. The 19th of November, 1984. I keep her toys in the living room. Thomas asked me to put them away. I told him no. He didn't ask again. The 25th of December, 1984. Thomas left today. He said he can't watch me disappear. He said I'm choosing her over him. But she's my baby. How can I choose anything else? Olivia closed the journal, her hands shaking. She looked at James, her eyes wet. She lost her daughter, Olivia said quietly. James nodded, his jaw tight. And then she lost everything else. Olivia reached for the 2nd journal, then the 3rd, her hands moving faster now, as if she couldn't stop. The entries became darker, more desperate. Eleanor wrote about hearing Catherine's voice in the hallway, about setting up the small room as a shrine, filling it with everything that had been hers, about locking the door from the outside so she wouldn't be tempted to stay inside forever. I know it's not healthy, she wrote in 1991. I know I'm supposed to move on, but I can't. I won't. If I let her go, what's left of me? The final journal was the thinnest, its pages mostly blank. Olivia opened it carefully. The last entry was dated just weeks before Eleanor's death, and tucked inside, folded once, was a letter. Olivia's hands shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was shakier now, the letters slanting unevenly across the page. At the top, in careful script, were the words, "To whoever finds this." Olivia read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. I spent 40 years trying to bring her back. I thought if I kept her room exactly as it was, if I kept her things close, if I spoke to her every night, she might hear me. She might come back. I failed. But maybe you won't. If you've lost someone, if you're drowning like I was, don't make my mistake. Don't lock yourself away from the living. Don't let grief become the only thing that's real. I know what it's like to lose a child. I know the weight of it. The way it crushes you until you can't remember what it felt like to breathe without pain. But you have to keep breathing. You have to keep living. Please, don't end up like me. Olivia's voice broke on the last line. She set the letter down, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. James reached for her, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Live. She pulled away, standing abruptly, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I can't, she whispered. I can't do this. Olivia. She's me, James. Her voice cracked. She's exactly what I've been doing, locking myself away, refusing to let go. And She stopped, her hand pressed against her chest, her eyes wild. James stood slowly, his hands raised like he was approaching something fragile. You're not her, he said quietly. How do you know? Olivia's voice was raw. How do you know I won't end up like that? Alone in a house full of ghosts? James took a step closer. Because you're not alone, he said. I'm here. I've always been here. Olivia looked at him, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't pull away. She let him reach for her. She let him pull her close, and she sobbed into his chest while the house settled around them, quiet and still, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Olivia couldn't stop reading. For 3 days, she sat on the living room floor surrounded by Eleanor's journals, her phone abandoned, meals forgotten. James tried to pull her away gently at first, suggesting they'd take a walk, get some air, maybe call someone about the house inspection they'd scheduled. But Olivia barely looked up. I need to understand, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the yellowed pages. James crouched beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Understand what? Why she did it, why she locked herself away. Liv, you already know why. She lost her daughter. She couldn't. I need to know if she ever got out. Olivia interrupted, her voice tight. If she ever found a way to stop drowning. James didn't answer. Because they both knew she hadn't. Olivia read the journals in order, tracing Eleanor's descent year by year. In 1985, Eleanor wrote about planting a garden for Catherine, even though Catherine would never see it bloom. In 1987, she described sitting in the hidden room for hours, talking to the air, pretending Catherine was still there. By 1990, the entries had grown sparse, disjointed. I know Thomas was right. I know I drove him away, but I couldn't let her go. I still can't. If I forget her voice, what's left? If I stop missing her, does that mean she never existed? Olivia's hands trembled as she turned the page. She saw herself in every line. The way Eleanor clung to Catherine's memory like a life raft, even as it pulled her under. the way she shut out everyone who tried to help, convinced that grief was the only thing keeping her daughter alive. Olivia had done the same thing. For 2 years, she'd carried Lily's memory like a stone in her chest, too afraid to set it down, terrified that if she stopped mourning, she'd be betraying her daughter. And in the process, she'd pushed James so far away she'd forgotten what it felt like to be close to him. On the 4th night, James found Olivia sitting in the hidden room. She was curled on the floor, her back against the wall, holding Catherine's stuffed rabbit in her lap. The beam of his flashlight swept across her face, and he saw the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Liv," he said softly, stepping inside. She didn't look up. James knelt beside her, setting the flashlight on the floor so it cast a dim glow across the small space. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "I've been doing exactly what she did." James didn't respond, just waited. "I shut you out," Olivia continued, her voice cracking. "I locked myself away. I convinced myself that if I stopped thinking about Lily every second of every day, I'd be forgetting her. But I wasn't protecting her memory, James. I was just disappearing." Her breath hitched, and she pressed the rabbit against her chest, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry." James reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers. "I miss her too," he said quietly. Olivia looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I know you do, but I didn't know how to let you in. Every time you tried to talk about her, I felt like I was going to break apart. So I just stopped talking." "I know," James said. "But Liv, I'm still here. I've always been here, and I need you to come back to me." Olivia's face crumpled, and she leaned into him, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her while she cried, his arms wrapped tightly around her, as if he could hold her together by sheer force of will. And for the first time in 2 years, Olivia let herself believe that maybe she didn't have to carry this alone. Later that night, after Olivia had finally fallen asleep on the couch, James returned to the hidden room. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe just a reason to understand why this woman's life had collided so violently with theirs. He picked up the tape recorder, turning it over in his hands. The spools were loaded with tape, but he hadn't pressed play yet. Now, sitting alone in the dim light, he did. The machine whirred to life, crackling with static, and then Eleanor's voice filled the small room. It was softer than James expected, tired but steady. "If you're listening to this, then you found the room. You found my shame, my failure." A pause. "I don't know who you are. Maybe you're someone like me, someone who lost a child and doesn't know how to keep living. Maybe you're just curious. Either way, I want you to know something." Another pause. Longer this time. "I had another chance. After Thomas left, after I spent years locked in this room, I got pregnant again. A boy. I carried him to term, and when he was born, I looked at him and felt nothing but terror." James's breath caught. "I couldn't do it again. I couldn't love him the way he deserved because I was too afraid of losing him. So I gave him up. I signed the papers 3 days after he was born and never saw him again." Eleanor's voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I know now that I was just protecting myself. And in the process, I lost everything." The tape continued, but James stopped listening. He stared at the recorder, his mind racing. Eleanor had another child, a son she gave up for adoption, which meant somewhere out there, Eleanor's son was still alive, maybe in his 30s or 40s now, with no idea his birth mother had spent decades locked in grief. James's hands shook as he rewound the tape and pressed play again, this time listening more carefully. Near the end, Eleanor said something that made his blood run cold. If you find this, and if you have the courage I didn't, maybe you can do what I couldn't. Maybe you can find him. His name is Daniel. Daniel Finch. Born the 12th of March, 1987. I left him at St. Mary's Hospital in Pittsburgh. James sat back, his heart pounding. Eleanor hadn't just left them a warning. She'd left them a mission. The next morning, James showed Olivia the tape. She listened in silence, her face pale, her hands folded in her lap. When it finished, she looked at him. "We have to find him," she said. James nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think we do. Not for Eleanor," Olivia added quietly. "For us." James frowned. "What do you mean?" Olivia looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if we can give her son the closure she never got, maybe we can learn how to give ourselves some too." James reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. And for the first time since they'd moved into the house, he felt like they were moving in the same direction. Together. Finding Daniel Finch was harder than they expected. James spent hours on the phone with St. Mary's Hospital in Pittsburgh, navigating automated menus and being transferred between departments that didn't seem to exist. Adoption records from 1,987 were sealed, the social worker explained patiently. Privacy laws, medical confidentiality. Unless Daniel himself initiated the search, there was nothing they could do. James hung up and rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones. Olivia sat across from him at the kitchen table, her laptop open, scrolling through adoption reunion websites and message boards where people posted desperate pleas for information about birth parents. "There has to be a way," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. James leaned back in his chair, watching her. She'd barely slept in days, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. He recognized that look, the obsession, the need to fix something, anything, because it felt like the only way to survive. "Liv," he said carefully. "Maybe we should step back for a minute." She didn't look up. "We're close. I can feel it." "That's not what I mean." She stopped scrolling, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "Then what do you mean?" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I mean, are we doing this for Eleanor? Or for us?" Olivia finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Yeah." James said quietly. "I think it does." She closed the laptop slowly, her jaw tight. "You think I'm projecting. I think we're both grieving. And I think finding Daniel feels like, I don't know, like if we can fix Eleanor's story, maybe we can fix ours." Olivia's eyes flashed. "Is that so wrong?" "No," James said. "But what if we can't find him? What if he doesn't want to be found? What if we upend his entire life just so we can feel better about ours?" Olivia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" "It's about doing what's right," she said, her voice rising. Eleanor spent 40 years locked in that room because she was too afraid to live. She gave up her son because she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. And now he's out there somewhere, not knowing his mother spent her entire life mourning him. Don't you think he deserves to know that? James stood too, his voice calm but firm. And what if he's happy? What if he has a family, a life, and we show up with this story and it destroys him? Olivia stared at him, her breath coming fast. "You're scared," she said quietly. "Yeah," James admitted. "I am." "Of what?" "Of you disappearing again," his voice cracked. "Of losing you to this the same way Eleanor lost everything." Olivia's face crumpled, and she looked away, her arms wrapping around herself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia's voice, barely above a whisper, "I don't know how to stop." James crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. She resisted at first, her body stiff, but then she collapsed against him, her forehead pressed to his chest. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together." 3 days later, Olivia found something. She'd been combing through adoption reunion forums, cross-referencing names and dates, when she stumbled across a post from 6 months ago. Looking for birth mother Eleanor Finch, born Pittsburgh, the 12th of March 1987. Any information appreciated. The username was simple, dfinch87. Olivia's hands shook as she clicked on the profile. There were no photos, no personal details, just a brief bio. Searching for answers, hoping for closure. She called James over, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. "I found him." James read the post over her shoulder, his heart pounding. "Are you sure? The dates match. The location matches. It has to be him." James pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. "So what do we do?" Olivia stared at the screen, her cursor hovering over the send message button. "We tell him the truth." Olivia typed slowly, deleting and rewriting each sentence half a dozen times. Finally, she settled on something simple. "My name is Olivia Harper. My husband and I recently moved into a house in Pennsylvania that once belonged to Eleanor Finch. We found something we think you should see. If you're willing, we'd like to talk." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she closed the laptop and looked at James. "What if he doesn't respond?" "Then we tried," James said. "That's all we can do." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Because this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about whether they could face the truth Eleanor had left behind, and whether they were strong enough to learn from it. The response came 2 days later. Olivia was in the hidden room, sitting on the floor with Catherine's stuffed rabbit in her lap, when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look, but something made her reach for it. The message was short, direct, and impossibly real. "I've been looking for her my whole life. When can we meet?" Ah! Olivia stared at the words, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked to the doorway where James was standing in the hall, watching her. "He wants to meet," she said quietly. James nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then we meet him." Olivia looked back at the hidden room at the chest, the journals, the photograph of Catherine on the wall, Eleanor's life, frozen in time, waiting for someone to finish the story. "Yeah," Olivia whispered. "We do." But as she turned off the light and closed the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. That once they gave Daniel the truth, there would be no going back. For any of them. Daniel Finch arrived on a Thursday afternoon, driving a 10-year-old sedan that coughed black smoke when he turned off the engine. James watched from the window as Daniel climbed out tall, lean, maybe 37 or 38, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep in his pockets as he stood in the driveway, staring up at the house. James turned to Olivia, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "He's here," James said quietly. Olivia nodded but didn't move. James walked to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch. Daniel looked up, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel walked forward, extending his hand. "James?" "Yeah." James shook his hand. "Come on in." They sat in the living room, the three of them arranged awkwardly on furniture that still smelled faintly of dust and disuse. Daniel's eyes kept drifting to the journals stacked on the coffee table, to the wooden chest sitting open beside the fireplace. "I don't even know where to start," he said quietly. Olivia leaned forward, her hands clasped in her lap. Your mother's name was Eleanor Finch. She lived in this house for most of her life. She lost a daughter, Catherine, in 1984. Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw tight. I knew she'd had another child. The adoption agency told me that much, but they wouldn't tell me anything else. She never recovered from losing Catherine, James said carefully. It consumed her. And when she got pregnant with you, she was terrified. Not of you, of losing you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. So she gave me up. She thought she was protecting you, Olivia said, her voice cracking. From herself, from her grief. She believed you'd be better off without her. Daniel looked down at his hands, his shoulders shaking. Was she right? Olivia's breath hitched. I don't know. They showed him everything. The journals, spanning decades of Eleanor's life, her early joy, her slow descent, her final desperate isolation. The hidden room, still untouched, with Catherine's belongings carefully preserved. The tape recorder, with Eleanor's voice crackling through the speakers, reading bedtime stories to a daughter who would never hear them. Daniel sat on the floor of the hidden room, holding one of Catherine's drawings, a crayon sun, lopsided and bright. Tears streamed down his face. She loved her, he whispered. She loved Catherine so much it destroyed her. Yeah, James said quietly. She did. Daniel looked up at them, his eyes red. Did she ever say anything about me? In the journals? Olivia hesitated, then nodded. She pulled out the final journal and opened it to a page near the end. I think about him every day. My son. I wonder if he's happy. I wonder if he thinks about me. I hope he doesn't. I hope he has a family who loves him the way I couldn't. I hope he never knows how much of a coward I was. Daniel's face crumpled, and he pressed his hands to his eyes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Olivia knelt beside him, her own tears falling. She loved you, Olivia said softly. She just didn't know how to keep you safe from her own pain. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. And for a long time, the three of them sat in the small, hidden room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been consumed by grief. If this story is reminding you of the power of confronting the past instead of hiding from it, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because sometimes the most important truths are the ones we're most afraid to face. Later, as the sun set and the house filled with long shadows, Daniel asked if he could be alone in the hidden room for a while. James and Olivia gave him space, retreating to the kitchen. They stood at opposite ends of the room, not speaking, not touching. Olivia stared out the window at the darkening yard. We did the right thing, she said quietly. James didn't respond. Didn't we? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. I don't know, Liv. I don't know if we did it for him or for us. Olivia's jaw tightened. Does it matter? Yeah, James said. It does. She turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing. We gave him the truth. We gave him closure. That's more than Eleanor ever could. And what about us? James asked, his voice rising slightly. What about our closure? Are we any closer to healing, or are we just running from it by fixing someone else's story? Olivia flinched, and for a moment she looked like she might shout back. But then her shoulders sagged, and she looked away. I don't know, she whispered. An hour later, Daniel emerged from the hidden room. His eyes were red, but his expression was calm. Thank you, he said simply, for finding me, for telling me. Olivia nodded, her throat tight. Daniel hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this in the chest. It was tucked into the lining. I think, I think she meant for someone to find it. He handed the paper to Olivia. It was a letter, written in Eleanor's shaky handwriting, dated just days before her death. Olivia unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling. To whoever stays, if you're reading this, you found the room. You found my shame. But maybe you also found a reason to stay. Don't let grief take your home. Don't let it take your love. I lost everything because I couldn't let go. I locked myself away, and in the process, I lost my husband, my son, and any chance at happiness. You still have time. Please, don't waste it like I did. Don't let the people you love become ghosts before they're gone. Eleanor. Olivia's vision blurred, tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked up at James, and for the first time in days, she really saw him. Not as an obstacle, not as someone she had to protect herself from, but as the man she'd married, the man she'd built a life with, the man who was still here, still trying, still waiting for her to come back. James crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. She just held him, her face pressed against his chest, and let herself cry. Daniel watched them for a moment, then quietly let himself out, leaving them alone in the house that had brought them together by tearing them apart. The next morning, Olivia woke to find James standing in the doorway of the hidden room. He wasn't inside, just standing at the threshold, staring into the small space that had held so much grief. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. James didn't turn. Thinking about what to do with it. Olivia moved closer, standing beside him. The room looked different in the morning light, less haunting, more human. Just a small space, empty now, except for the memories it held. "We could seal it again," James said. "Put the wall back up. Pretend we never found it." Olivia shook her head slowly. "No, I don't want to do that." "Then what?" She was quiet for a moment, her eyes tracing the faded wallpaper, the wooden floor. "I want to keep it," she said finally. "But not like this. Not as a shrine. As, I don't know, a place to remember, without forgetting how to live." Wait. James turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "For Eleanor?" "For all of us," Olivia said softly. They worked together over the next few days, cleaning the small room with care. Olivia wiped down the walls, scrubbed the floor, opened the small window they hadn't noticed before, letting fresh air sweep through the stale space. James brought in a small lamp, a cushion, a shelf. They placed Eleanor's journals on the shelf, not hidden, but visible, a reminder of what happens when grief goes unshared. Olivia hung the photograph of Catherine on the wall, and beside it, she placed a small framed photo of Lily, the only one they had, taken during the ultrasound at 20 weeks. A grainy black and white image of a tiny profile, a hand raised as if waving. James saw it and stopped, his breath catching. "Liv, I want her here," Olivia said, her voice steady. "Not because I'm trying to hold on, but because she was real. She mattered, and I don't want to be afraid to remember her." James nodded, his throat tight. He reached out and touched the frame gently, his fingers trembling. "Yeah," he whispered. "She did." When Daniel returned a week later, he brought something with him. A letter, handwritten on plain paper, sealed in an envelope. "I wrote this for her," he said quietly, standing in the living room. "For Eleanor. I know she'll never read it, but I needed to say it anyway." Olivia smiled, her eyes wet. "Do you want to put it in the room?" Daniel nodded. They walked upstairs together, the three of them, and Daniel stepped into the small space that his mother had created. He looked around at the photographs on the wall, at the journals on the shelf, at the candle Olivia had lit that morning. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. He placed the letter on the shelf, beside the journals. Then he stood there for a long moment, his head bowed. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me life, even when you couldn't keep me. I understand now. I forgive you." His voice cracked, and Olivia reached out, resting her hand on his shoulder. They stood together in silence, three people bound by grief, learning that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to carry the past without being crushed by it. That afternoon, they planted a tree in the backyard. A dogwood, small and young, its branches bare but strong. Daniel dug the hole while James held the sapling steady, and Olivia poured the water, watching as it soaked into the dark earth. "For Eleanor," Daniel said quietly, "and Catherine, and everyone who got lost along the way." Olivia looked at James, and he took her hand, squeezing it gently. "And for the ones who found their way back," she added. They stood together as the sun set, watching the tree's shadow stretch across the grass. It wasn't much, just a small tree in a small yard, but it was alive, and that was enough. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and the dogwood bloomed small white flowers, delicate and bright, dotting the branches like snow. Olivia and James fell into a new rhythm. They talked more, laughed more, fought sometimes, but never in silence. They visited the hidden room together, not every day, but when they needed to, when the weight of Lily's absence felt too heavy, or when they needed to remember that grief didn't have to be a prison. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the dogwood sway in the breeze, Olivia turned to James. "I've been thinking about something," she said quietly. James looked at her, waiting. "I want to try again. Not having another baby. I don't think I'm ready for that. But maybe adoption." James's eyes widened slightly. "You're serious?" Olivia nodded, her voice steady but soft. "I don't want to replace Lily. I never could. But I think maybe the way to honor her is to choose to love again. To choose life, even when it's scary." James reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, I think that sounds right." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than survival. She felt hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of someone clinging to a life raft, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who had walked through fire and come out on the other side. That night, they stood in the doorway of the hidden room one last time. The candle flickered softly on the shelf, casting gentle shadows across the photographs on the wall. Catherine, Lily, Eleanor's journals, Daniel's letter, all of it, held together in a space that no longer felt like a tomb. James turned off the light and closed the door gently. Not locking it, just closing it. "You ready?" he asked. Olivia nodded, slipping her hand into his. "Yeah, I'm ready." They walked down the hall together, their footsteps echoing softly on the old wooden floors. And behind them, the house settled into the quiet of evening, no longer haunted, no longer heavy. Just a house, just a home, waiting for the next chapter to begin. A year later, the house felt different. Not because they'd torn down walls or repainted every room, though they'd done some of that, but because it no longer held its breath. The windows stayed open now, even in winter, letting cold air sweep through the hallways, carrying away the staleness that had settled into every corner. Light found its way into places that had been dark for decades. And the house once heavy with grief it couldn't name had become something else. A home. Olivia stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as James helped a little girl climb the dogwood tree in the backyard. Sophie was 5, small for her age, with dark curls that bounced when she laughed. She'd been with them for 3 months now, and in 2 more, the adoption would be final. Olivia had been terrified at first. Terrified of loving someone new. Terrified of losing again. But James had reminded her of Eleanor's letter. You still have time. Don't waste it. So they'd chosen to try. And Sophie, bright, curious, fearless Sophie, had walked into their lives like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, after dinner, Sophie tugged on Olivia's hand. Can we go to the reading room? She asked, her eyes wide. Olivia smiled. Of course, sweetheart. The hidden room wasn't hidden anymore. They'd installed a lamp, a small bookshelf, a cushioned bench beneath the window. Sophie called it her reading room, and she spent hours there, surrounded by books and the soft glow of the lamp. She didn't know the room's history, not yet. Someday, when she was older, Olivia and James would tell her about Eleanor, about Catherine, about the grief that had once filled this space. But for now, it was just a room. A quiet place where a little girl could read and dream and feel safe. Olivia settled onto the bench beside Sophie, pulling a book from the shelf. Sophie curled up against her, her small hand resting on Olivia's arm. As Olivia began to read, her eyes drifted to the shelf behind them. Eleanor's journals, their leather spines worn and faded. The photograph of Catherine, smiling beside the picture of Lily. And next to those, a new edition, a framed photo of the three of them, taken just last month. James, Olivia, and Sophie, standing in front of the house. The dogwood tree blooming behind them. Olivia's throat tightened, but not with grief, with gratitude, for the life they were building, for the daughter who had chosen them as much as they'd chosen her, for the man standing in the doorway now, leaning against the frame, watching them with a soft smile on his face. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep in her room, Olivia and James stood together in the hallway outside the hidden room. The door was open, the lamp still glowing softly inside. Do you ever wonder what Eleanor would think? Olivia asked quietly. If she could see this? James slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. I think she'd be glad, he said, that someone finally learned from her story. Olivia nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. They stood there in silence for a long moment, listening to the house settle around them, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through the open windows. It wasn't a sad sound anymore. It was just the sound of a house that had lived a long time, carrying stories it would never forget. But now, those stories didn't weigh it down. They lifted it up. Outside, the dogwood tree swayed gently in the evening breeze, its white blossoms glowing faintly in the dusk. Beneath it, the earth was soft and dark, nourished by the roots that ran deep. And in the house, warm light spilled from every window, chasing away the shadows. James closed the door to the hidden room gently, his hand lingering on the handle for just a moment. Then he turned, taking Olivia's hand, and they walked down the hall together. Not running from the past, not trapped by it, just carrying it forward, with love. The house no longer kept secrets. It kept memories. And in the spaces where grief had once lived, there was room now for something else. Hope. Laughter. Life. Some walls we build are meant to protect us from pain, but they also keep out the light. Grief doesn't heal by being locked away. It heals when we're brave enough to open the door, let someone in, and choose love again. The past we leave behind isn't meant to haunt us. It's meant to teach us that even after everything falls apart, we can build something beautiful from what remains.